The United States naval blockade against Iran has just faced its toughest test so far. On Wednesday, April 15, 2026, the situation is one of maximum pressure at sea, growing risk in the oil market, and a direct test of American authority on the world's most sensitive energy route. At the center of the crisis are oil tankers linked to Iran and China, the attempt to squeeze Iran's economy, and at the same time, the opening of rare talks between Israel and Lebanon. What happened in practice was the following. Washington announced that no ship could enter or leave Iranian ports without authorization. The United States Central Command said that in the first 24 hours, no ship passed through the blockade and 6 merchant vessels returned to Iranian ports. At the same time, more than 10,000 military personnel, more than a dozen warships, and dozens of aircraft were deployed in the operation. But the tension increased because after that, there were reports of vessels linked to Iran and China testing the blockade. Among them, the oil tanker Rich Terry, under Chinese control and already sanctioned, as well as 2 oil tankers that were intercepted after leaving Chabahar. In other words, the blockade held. It went through its first real test, and that by itself is a political and military shock. At the center of this dispute are, on one side, Donald Trump and the United States military machine. On the other side, the Iranian regime, which tries to maintain some room to maneuver. And in the middle, China, which heavily depends on the energy flow from the Gulf. The blockade came after the failure of the weekend talks between Americans and Iranians. Now, Trump has once again said that they could happen in Islamabad, Pakistan later this week. He remains tough. The United States wants a long freeze of the Iranian nuclear program and also the removal of enriched material from Iranian territory. Iran wants a much shorter deadline and relief from sanctions. How? With economic, naval, and diplomatic pressure at the same time. Why? Because Washington wants to force Tehran to give in without opening the door to war. Quick recovery of the regime in the military and nuclear fields. China reacted because it understands that this chokehold threatens its direct interests. The American government accused Beijing of stockpiling oil instead of helping to ease the shortage. Meanwhile, the Chinese side responded by saying that the root of the problem lies in the war and called for an end to military operations. This clash helps explain why oil tankers linked to sanctioned companies have become a central part of the crisis. This clash explains the crisis. It's about knowing who controls the route, who can impose costs on the adversary, and who can maintain the minimum energy flow so as not to leave other nations adrift. At the same time, another explosive front has opened in Washington. Israel and Lebanon held their first direct talks in decades, mediated by Secretary Marco Rubio. Israel entered these negotiations demanding the disarmament of Hezbollah and refusing to discuss a ceasefire as a priority. The Lebanese side called for a ceasefire, the return of displaced people, and humanitarian relief. Hezbollah, on the other hand, reacted with fury and called the opening of this channel a national sin, making it clear that it sees this rapprochement as a direct threat to its power within Lebanon. This answers the question about why this conversation is happening now, for Israel and for the United States. The goal is to isolate Hezbollah, to weaken Israeli influence na fronteira norte israelense e to prevent Iran from using Lebanon as a permanent extension of the war. The overall picture is grim and very clear. Iran is trying to buy time. The United States is trying to apply pressure by sea. China is trying to prevent its energy security from being crushed. Israel is trying to turn its military advantage into a political rearrangement in Lebanon. And Hezbollah is trying to sabotage any talks that might reduce its control. So when you ask, what does this crisis mean? The answer is straightforward. It means that Hormuz has become the most dangerous pressure point right now. That the American blockade is already being challenged, and that the war is no longer just an exchange of attacks, but has also become a battle for routes, oil, diplomacy, and regional survival. At the end of this crisis, the image that remains is of a route under maximum tension. On one side, the powerful United States Navy, trying to project overwhelming force and protect the country. On the other side, China advancing with ships linked to the energy trade in a clear attempt to test how far this blockade will really go. It's a message. Beijing signals that it does not intend to passively accept the choking off of the world's main oil route, while Washington tries to prove that it still has control over the most sensitive sea on the planet. If this test continues, the blockade stops being just a show of power and becomes an open struggle over authority, calculation, and global risk.